Alright guys, so as you know, Diablo 4 is going to be a live service game. One of the hallmarks of a live service game is the fact that you can balance and change it on the fly. Now that's not something that's going to be lost with Diablo 4. Diablo 4 is going to do the same thing that other live service games do, which is balance the game on the fly. Well, how does this sort of relate to you, and how is this going to affect you moving forward in your time with Diablo 4? So Game Radar just put out an article within the last day or two talking about how the Diablo 4 devs are going to draw the line on builds getting too overpowered. The main takeaway is the big line at the top right under the title. It says Blizzard won't go easy on nerfs. Now obviously there's going to be some clickbait to this, but there is actually good information in here. So let's go through the article and then we'll discuss both the positives and the negatives and how this is going to affect both you and I playing Diablo 4 here next month. The article starts off with the line, Diablo 4's devs really don't want you to feel overpowered. It goes on to say that in the latest issue of PC Gamer, the lead class designer, Adam, spoke about the combat design, admitting that it's, quote, fun to be powerful and even to feel or be overpowered, end quote. And then they sort of paraphrase some of the sentence saying a little bit, but that, quote, unquote, there are lines. So in reading this, it sounds like they're going to allow you to have a power fantasy, but they still want to keep challenge in the game throughout your entire playthrough. Jackson continues that everything is on a spectrum and sort of touches on the interviewer's build that was outside of the spectrum, talking about how some of the necromancer's skills got brought into line after the first round of betas. The article continues that that was bad luck for this particular wielder of the undead and might also be a bit of a warning sign for those who would manipulate, we'll use that word lightly, Diablo 4's classes and builds to becoming a little overpowered. The article continues that Jackson even nodded along before the PC Gamer's interview had finished, describing their personal necromancer's build. The lead class designers probably heard all of this before, and the interview reveals that they definitely aren't afraid of warning players away from overpowered builds. So as the article starts to conclude, they talk about the stage is set for Diablo 4's classes going forward, and they're summarizing that sort of Jackson's comments make it sound like Blizzard's not going to be afraid to step in and adjust the metrics as they go, which is something that if you've ever played a live service game, you will notice happens regularly. Some games have a fast cycle because their engine allows for quick on-the-fly changes. Some games, most notably Destiny 2, has a very long cycle between buffs and nerfs just because it takes them a little bit longer to implement them. So what does this mean for your builds moving forward in Diablo 4? Well, at this point, everything's going to be speculation. But I feel like we can take a note from sort of the information that we've been provided, as well as how live service games function across the industry right now. I feel like the good news out of all this is that the Diablo team has a vested interest in the game doing well. They want to ensure replayability by sort of squashing the major outliers that will pigeonhole people into only playing the game one way. This also means that they'll look at things that are underperforming and bring them up to try to make them more viable. This is going to ensure better balance across the game and should, for the most part, create a good playing experience for every player, for your average Andy all the way up to your grinders. We do need to talk about sort of the bad with this, right? The flip side of the coin. The flip side of the coin here is that you will never fully be able to fulfill your power fantasy if, as it seems, the developers don't want to allow any one build to run away. So what does that mean? You are not going to end up in a Diablo 3 style situation where you just run over the hardest mobs in the game, one-shotting everything, and just power through the whole game. Now, this will take away some of the fun for those grinders and people who just really enjoy that style of gameplay. Ultimately, what I think Diablo is trying to do here is create sort of a balanced approach to where your time never feels wasted and you always continue to feel stronger, even up to the very end of the game. This will ensure a very clean, fun, replayability game loop for a lot of people and should help cut down, in my mind, some of the boredom that comes from getting to max level. The downside to this is you will never truly feel like you are at the end of the game, even when you get there, if you aren't allowed to sort of surpass the highest level gear and trivialize it. You take the fact that Diablo 4's dev teams want to keep everything balanced and mix that with the new limited nature of the Paragon boards, and this will create very clear hard stops on your ability to gain power. Now, we do need to see this post-launch and see how it plays out, but I can see where their team is coming from and why they're wanting to go with this approach to create a healthy long-term ecosystem for the game. But ultimately, it's going to be down to the players and how the players receive this. So let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on the live service sort of balancing as they go aspect. And if you really enjoy having a challenge the entire time you play the game, or if you're the type of person that really enjoys grinding, becoming overpowered, and enjoying your power fantasy. I'd love to have a conversation down in the comments. And as always, have a great day.